You believe that to stop overthinking, you need to fight and force your mind into silence. But Zen wisdom reveals the opposite. True calm doesn't come from inner war, but from peaceful observation. When you stop fighting your thoughts and learn to watch them like clouds passing in the sky, without clinging to any of them, something miraculous happens. The mind, which was once a storm, finds its own silence. Prepare yourself for sleep, because tonight, through ancient stories, you will learn to simply observe instead of fight. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment what part of the world you're watching from. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. Have you ever tried to learn something new only to find your own expertise getting in the way? This is exactly what the famous Zen parable of the empty cup addresses. In this ancient story, a university professor visits a Zen master seeking wisdom. As they sit down for tea, the professor begins listing his academic accomplishments and expressing his theories about Zen. The master silently pours tea into the professor's cup, continuing to pour even as the cup overflows onto the table. Alarmed, the professor exclaims, "Stop! The cup is full! No more will go in!" The master replies, "Like this cup, your mind is full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" This deceptively simple story contains profound wisdom about why we get stuck in patterns of overthinking and how to break free from them. The overflowing teacup represents our minds crammed with preconceptions, judgments, and fixed ideas about how things should be. When our mental cups are already full, there's no room for new perspectives or experiences to enter. We might physically be in the present moment, but mentally we're filtering everything through existing knowledge and beliefs. The practice of emptying our cup isn't about becoming ignorant or dismissing what we know. Rather, it's about creating space for direct experience by temporarily setting aside what we think we know. Consider how often we approach situations with our minds already made up. We meet someone new, but immediately categorize them based on appearance. We try a new experience, but compare it constantly to past experiences. We listen to someone speak, but are already formulating our response before they finish. These are all examples of approaching life with a full cup. The Buddhist tradition refers to this tendency as beginner's mind versus expert's mind. As the Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki famously said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind there are few." When we operate from expert's mind, overthinking flourishes because we're constantly analysing, categorising and judging rather than directly experiencing what's before us. The mental chatter becomes endless as we try to fit each new experience into our existing framework. Practically speaking, how can we practice emptying our cup in everyday life? One approach is to notice when you're bringing preconceptions to a situation. Before an important conversation, meeting, or experience, take a few moments to acknowledge what assumptions you might be carrying. You might ask yourself, what am I expecting to happen here? What opinions do I already hold about this person or situation? Can I set these aside temporarily and experience what's actually occurring? Another powerful practice is to intentionally adopt a stance of not knowing. This doesn't mean pretending to be ignorant, but rather holding your knowledge lightly and remaining open to being surprised or wrong. When you catch yourself thinking, "I already know this," or "I know where this is going," that's a signal to empty your cup. Take a breath and see if you can approach the situation with fresh eyes. The physical sensation of a full versus empty cup can also be used as a mindfulness anchor. When you notice your mind racing with judgments or opinions, visualize your mental cup overflowing, creating mess and confusion. Then imagine pouring out the excess, creating space and clarity. This simple visualization can interrupt the overthinking cycle and remind you to return to direct experience. What makes emptying our cup so challenging is that our identities often become wrapped up in what we know. The professor in the story didn't just have knowledge about Zen. His self-image was connected to being knowledgeable. Emptying our cup requires a willingness to temporarily let go of this aspect of identity, to be vulnerable and open to not knowing. This vulnerability is precisely what creates the conditions for genuine learning and insight. Neuroscience supports this ancient wisdom. Research shows that when we approach situations with strong preconceptions, our brains actually filter incoming information, focusing only on details that confirm what we already believe and discarding contradictory evidence. This confirmation bias strengthens overthinking patterns because we keep reinforcing the same neural pathways. By consciously emptying our cup, we allow our brains to form new connections and see patterns we might otherwise miss. The practice of emptying the cup also teaches us to distinguish between useful knowledge and limiting beliefs. Not everything in our cup needs to be discarded. The skill lies in recognizing when our accumulated knowledge serves us and when it becomes an obstacle. Often the most limiting contents of our cup aren't facts but judgments about ourselves, others, and what's possible or impossible. Many people resist emptying their cup because they fear losing control or appearing foolish. There's comfort in believing we understand how things work. But as the Zen tradition teaches, true wisdom often begins with acknowledging how little we actually know. This acknowledgement isn't cause for anxiety but liberation. When we release the need to know everything, the burden of overthinking naturally lightens. In organizational settings, the empty cup philosophy has profound implications. Companies often stagnate because leadership is unwilling to empty their cups and consider new approaches. Innovation requires creating space for possibilities that don't fit existing models. The most successful leaders and teams regularly practice emptying their cups through structured reflection and challenging their own assumptions. The empty cup parable reminds us that overthinking often stems not from too little knowledge, but from minds too full of concepts, judgments, and fixed ideas. The path to mental clarity isn't through accumulating more information, but creating space for direct experience. By regularly emptying our cups, approaching life with openness rather than certainty, we create the conditions for both inner peace and genuine wisdom to emerge. The Two Monks and the River. Abandoning emotional burdens. Imagine walking a long, dusty road with a heavy backpack. At some point, you have the opportunity to put it down, yet you choose to keep carrying it for hours afterward. Sounds absurd, doesn't it? Yet this is precisely what we do with emotional burdens and overthinking. One of Buddhism's most memorable parables illustrates this tendency perfectly. In this classic Zen story, two monks, an elder and a younger one, were travelling together, returning to their monastery after a long journey. They came upon a river crossing where they met a beautiful young woman in a silk kimono. She was afraid to cross the river for fear of ruining her valuable garment. Without hesitation, the elder monk picked her up, carried her across the water, and gently set her down on the other side. The monks continued their journey in silence. 5 hours later, the younger monk could no longer contain himself. "How could you do that?" he blurted out. "We monks are forbidden to touch women, especially beautiful ones. How could you carry her like that?" The elder monk looked at his companion with compassion and replied, "I left her by the riverside 5 hours ago. Are you still carrying her?" This simple yet profound story perfectly captures the essence of overthinking and how we unnecessarily prolong our own suffering. The young monk's mind was consumed with judgment, worry, and internal dialogue about an event that had ended hours earlier. While his physical body was walking along the path, his mind remained stuck at the riverside, replaying the scene over and over with increasing agitation. The story illustrates several important psychological principles. First is the critical distinction between primary and secondary suffering. Primary suffering is unavoidable. It's the natural discomfort that arises from life's challenging moments. The younger monk's initial shock at seeing his companion carry the woman was primary suffering. Secondary suffering, however, is optional. It's what we add through rumination, judgment, and overthinking. The 5 hours of mental anguish were entirely self-created secondary suffering. What made the elder monk's approach so powerful was not that he broke a rule, but that he responded to the present moment with appropriate action and then moved on completely. He didn't dwell on his decision, second-guess himself, or worry about potential consequences. He simply addressed the need before him and then returned fully to the present. This embodies what psychologists now call psychological flexibility, the ability to adapt to changing circumstances without becoming entangled in mental commentary about those circumstances. We can see 3 distinct skills demonstrated by the elder monk that help overcome overthinking. First is present moment awareness. His attention was fully on what was happening now rather than lost in past or future. Second is values-based action. He acted in alignment with deeper values of compassion and helpfulness rather than rigid adherence to rules. Third is cognitive diffusion. He didn't become entangled in thoughts about his actions, but maintained perspective on them. For those of us struggling with overthinking, this story offers practical guidance. We might ask ourselves, what woman am I still carrying? What past events, conversations, mistakes, or decisions am I unnecessarily carrying with me long after they have ended? These emotional burdens often disguise themselves as responsibility or thoroughness. We tell ourselves we're being diligent by analysing situations repeatedly, when in fact we're simply prolonging our suffering. Modern mindfulness practices offer structured ways to put down the woman. One approach is mental noting, where we simply label overthinking when it appears. There's rumination, there's worry, or there's replaying the past. This simple labeling creates a small but crucial bit of distance between ourselves and our thoughts. Another technique is to use physical cues as reminders to check whether we're mentally carrying something unnecessarily. For instance, each time you walk through a doorway, you might briefly check if your mind is fully present or if it's carrying baggage from earlier events. Organizations and workplaces are particularly fertile ground for the carrying the woman phenomenon. How often do meetings run overtime because people keep rehashing decisions already made? How much productivity is lost to employees ruminating about workplace conflicts or feedback? Leaders who can model the elder monk's approach, addressing issues directly when they arise and then fully moving on, create cultures of both efficiency and psychological safety. What's particularly interesting about the story is that the elder monk's initial action was potentially controversial. He broke a monastic rule about touching women, yet his transgression created less suffering than the younger monk's rigid adherence to rules. This highlights how overthinking often stems from absolutist thinking, seeing rules, expectations, and norms as inflexible commands rather than guidelines that must be balanced with other values like compassion and practicality. The parable also illustrates how overthinking is frequently tied to judgment of others and ourselves. The younger monk wasn't just thinking about what happened, he was making it wrong. He was judging his companion's actions and probably worrying about what it meant about himself, the rules, and their relationship. When we notice ourselves caught in overthinking loops, we often find judgment at their core. By recognizing and releasing judgment, we create space for the overthinking to naturally subside. From a neurological perspective, the elder monk demonstrated what scientists now understand about healthy brain function. Recent research shows that overthinking is associated with dominance of the default mode network, brain regions active when we're lost in self-referential thought. By contrast, present moment awareness activates different neural networks associated with direct experience. The elder monk intuitively understood how to shift from one mode to the other, a skill modern mindfulness practices specifically cultivate. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of this story is its reminder that we always have choice about what we carry. Each moment offers a fresh opportunity to put down our burdens. The younger monk could have released his concerns at any point during those 5 hours. There was no external force compelling him to keep thinking about the woman. Similarly, our overthinking persists not because we can't stop it, but because we haven't yet learned to recognize our freedom to put it down. The story of the two monks reminds us that mental freedom doesn't come from controlling our circumstances, but from how we relate to them. Life will inevitably present rivers to cross, and rules that sometimes need bending. True wisdom lies not in avoiding these situations, but in responding to them skillfully, and then continuing our journey unburdened by what's already passed. In the elder monk's simple response, we find a profound invitation to set down what no longer serves us and walk freely into the next moment. The story of the two monks illustrates how we can choose to release our mental burdens, a practice that brings immediate freedom. Similarly, traditional Japanese tea ceremonies offer another pathway to mental liberation through transforming ordinary activities into opportunities for complete presence. While we might think special circumstances are required to quiet an overthinking mind, the tea ceremony, Chado, demonstrates how everyday rituals can become profound mindfulness practices. Dating back more than 400 years, the Japanese tea ceremony elevates the simple act of preparing and drinking tea into an art form that cultivates mindfulness in every movement. What makes this practice particularly relevant for addressing overthinking is that it transforms something we might normally do on autopilot into an experience of full sensory engagement. When fully immersed in the ceremony, participants find their racing thoughts naturally quieting without direct effort to stop thinking. The ceremony begins with guests walking through a garden path designed to create a transition from the outside world to the present moment. This physical journey mirrors the mental journey of leaving behind daily concerns. Upon entering the tea room, guests observe the simple, minimalist aesthetic specifically designed to avoid overstimulation and bring attention to subtle details often missed by busy minds. The host prepares by cleansing both hands and mouth, symbolizing the cleansing of distracting thoughts and unnecessary words. Every aspect of the traditional ceremony is performed with deliberate, unhurried movements. The host carefully wipes each utensil with a cloth, heats the water in an iron kettle, scoops the powdered green tea with a bamboo scoop, and whisks it in a ceramic bowl until it becomes frothy. Each gesture has been refined over centuries to promote complete absorption in the activity. This isn't about efficiency or multitasking, quite the opposite. It's about bringing one's entire attention to each moment of the process. What makes the tea ceremony particularly effective against overthinking is its engagement of all 5 senses. Participants notice the sound of water beginning to boil, the vibrant green colour of the matcha powder, the rough texture of the ceramic tea bowl, the bitter aroma of the tea, and finally its distinctive taste. By anchoring attention in these direct sensory experiences, the mind naturally moves away from abstract rumination and into the concrete reality of the present. Modern neuroscience confirms what tea masters have known intuitively, that multisensory engagement effectively interrupts the default mode network in the brain responsible for mind-wandering and overthinking. When our senses are fully engaged, different neural pathways activate, temporarily quieting the parts of the brain that generate self-referential thinking. This explains why participants often report a sense of mental spaciousness during and after the ceremony. You don't need to master the formal tea ceremony to benefit from its principles. Many people create simplified personal tea rituals that serve as daily mindfulness anchors. This might involve selecting a special cup used only for mindful tea drinking, arranging a dedicated space free from digital distractions, and committing to complete presence throughout the preparation and drinking process. Even 3 to 5 minutes of mindful tea preparation can create a meaningful break in patterns of overthinking. The practice becomes particularly powerful when we notice the mind's tendency to rush ahead or drift away during the process. When preparing tea mindfully, you might notice thoughts like, "I should hurry up and finish this," or "I still need to respond to those emails." Rather than judging these thoughts, tea practice involves simply acknowledging them and gently returning attention to the sensations of the present moment. The warmth of the cup, the rising steam, the changing colour as the tea steeps. In essence, the tea ceremony teaches that the antidote to overthinking isn't more thinking about how to stop thinking. It's shifting attention from abstract thought to direct sensory experience. This principle extends far beyond tea. Any routine activity can be transformed into a mindfulness practice through full presence and sensory engagement. Brushing teeth, washing dishes, preparing a meal, or even walking to the mailbox can become opportunities to step out of overthinking and into direct experience. Organizations increasingly recognize the value of ritual mindfulness practices like the tea ceremony for workplace well-being. Some companies now incorporate brief mindful tea breaks into their work culture, finding that these short pauses significantly reduce stress and improve focus. These communal practices are particularly effective because they combine sensory engagement with social connection, addressing multiple dimensions of well-being simultaneously. What distinguishes the tea ceremony from simply taking a break is intention and attention. Many people take coffee breaks throughout their day, but remain mentally preoccupied with work concerns or check their phones continuously. The tea ceremony creates a container for complete presence, a designated time and space where multitasking is deliberately set aside in favour of unified attention. This quality of attention, rather than the specific activity itself, is what interrupts overthinking. The wisdom of the tea ceremony reminds us that opportunities for mindfulness aren't separate from daily life. They exist within it. We don't need to escape to a monastery or meditation retreat to find respite from overthinking. We need only to bring new quality of attention to activities we're already doing. By transforming routine into ritual through presence and care, we discover that the ordinary contains the extraordinary. That within simple actions like preparing tea lies the potential for profound mental clarity. While the tea ceremony offers a structured approach to present moment awareness, Zen koans take an entirely different approach to disrupting overthinking patterns. These enigmatic riddles and paradoxical statements are specifically designed to short-circuit our habitual thought processes, creating openings for insights that logic alone cannot reach. Famous examples include, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" or "What was your face before your parents were born?" These questions aren't meant to be answered through analysis, but to exhaust the thinking mind and create space for direct perception. The word koan originally meant public case in ancient China, referring to legal precedents. In Zen practice, koans function as cases that test and challenge a student's understanding, revealing where they might be stuck in conceptual thinking rather than direct experience. Unlike conventional problems that can be solved through logical reasoning, koans deliberately contain paradoxes or impossibilities that cannot be resolved through ordinary thinking. When students first encounter koans, they typically respond by analysing, theorising, and searching for clever interpretations. This is precisely the overthinking trap the koan is designed to expose. After exhausting all logical approaches without satisfaction, students eventually reach what Zen calls great doubt, a state where the thinking mind recognises its own limitations. This cognitive impasse creates the conditions for a perceptual shift that bypasses overthinking entirely. In traditional Zen training, students meditate intensively on a single koan, carrying it with them throughout daily activities until it penetrates every aspect of consciousness. When meeting with their teacher, they present their understanding not through explanation, but through spontaneous demonstration. The teacher immediately knows whether the student has truly broken through conceptual thinking or is still caught in intellectual analysis. What makes koans particularly effective against overthinking is their direct confrontation with our compulsion to conceptualize experience. Most approaches to reducing overthinking still operate within the framework of thinking. We try to think our way out of excessive thinking. Koans, by contrast, deliberately frustrate the thinking mind to reveal what lies beyond it. They operate like cognitive circuit breakers, temporarily shutting down habitual thought patterns to allow fresh perception. The experience of working with koans often proceeds through distinct phases. Initially, students approach the koan intellectually, attempting to figure it out as they would any other problem. Next comes frustration and confusion, as all logical approaches prove inadequate. Eventually, many experience a giving up or surrender of the analytical mind. It's precisely in this surrender that breakthrough becomes possible, not because the koan is finally solved, but because the very framework of problem-solving has been transcended. Neuroscientifically, koans appear to temporarily disrupt default brain networks associated with self-referential thinking and narrative processing. Research using EEG measurements shows that experienced Zen practitioners demonstrate unusual brain activity patterns when contemplating koans, specifically a quieting of areas associated with conceptual processing and increased activity in regions linked to direct perception and bodily awareness. Modern psychology has recognized the value of koan-like interventions for breaking rumination cycles. Techniques like paradoxical intention, where therapists prescribe the very symptom clients want to eliminate, operate on similar principles. By deliberately embracing overthinking instead of fighting it, the pattern often naturally disrupts itself. Similarly, acceptance-based approaches recognize that directly trying to stop unwanted thoughts often intensifies them, while accepting their presence paradoxically allows them to subside. You don't need formal Zen training to benefit from koan-inspired practices. Simply holding questions that have no definitive answers can help loosen rigid thinking patterns. Questions like, "Who am I beyond my thoughts?" or "What is aware of my thinking?" function as contemporary koans that invite exploration beyond conceptual understanding. The key is approaching these questions with genuine curiosity, rather than expecting definitive answers. What distinguishes koan practice from philosophical contemplation is its embodied, experiential nature. Students don't just think about koans, they live with them, allowing them to permeate everyday activities until the boundary between the koan and the student dissolves. This total immersion creates conditions for insights that transcend intellectual understanding, offering glimpses of awareness unconditioned by conceptual thought. For modern practitioners dealing with overthinking, koans offer a radical alternative to conventional approaches. Rather than trying to fix, organize, or improve thinking, Cohen suggests the possibility of stepping outside the entire framework of conceptual thought. They point to a dimension of experience that exists prior to thinking, what Zen calls original mind or beginner's mind. This doesn't mean living without thought, but rather recognizing thought as just one aspect of a much vaster field of awareness. Organizations dealing with complex challenges increasingly draw inspiration from Cohen-like approaches. When teams become stuck in analytical paralysis or circular discussions, introducing deliberately paradoxical questions can break conceptual gridlock and invite creative solutions. Innovation often emerges not from more thorough analysis, but from temporarily setting aside existing frameworks to allow fresh perception. The wisdom of Cohen's reminds us that overthinking isn't just a matter of thinking too much. It's about being caught in particular kinds of thinking, analytical, sequential, and self-referential. By temporarily short-circuiting these patterns, Cohen's create openings for different modes of knowing to emerge. They remind us that our most valuable insights often arrive not through careful reasoning, but in moments when reasoning itself has been exhausted or suspended. While koans work to disrupt thinking patterns through paradox, Zen Buddhism also offers a more direct approach through the practice of zazen, or seated meditation. Zazen represents the foundational practice of Zen Buddhism and provides perhaps the most straightforward method for working with an overthinking mind. Unlike techniques that attempt to control or eliminate thoughts, Zazen takes a radically different approach, simply sitting with thoughts without becoming entangled in them. At first glance, Zazen appears deceptively simple. The practitioner sits in a stable, upright posture, traditionally on a cushion with legs crossed in lotus or half-lotus position, though sitting in a chair is perfectly acceptable for those with physical limitations. The back remains straight but not rigid, the chin slightly tucked, and the hands rest in a specific position called the cosmic mudra, where one hand holds the other with thumbs lightly touching. The eyes remain half open, with the gaze resting unfocused on the ground about 3 feet ahead. What makes Zazen particularly relevant to addressing overthinking is its instruction for working with thoughts. Unlike concentration practices that focus intensely on a single object, or visualization practices that engage the imagination, Zazen involves maintaining an open, spacious awareness that neither grasps at nor pushes away any content of mind. When thoughts arise, as they inevitably do, the practitioner simply acknowledges their presence without following them, elaborating on them, or trying to suppress them. A common instruction in Zazen is to treat thoughts like clouds passing through the sky of awareness. Just as the sky doesn't reach up to grab certain clouds or push away others, in Zazen we practice allowing thoughts to come and go naturally without interference. This non-interventionist approach directly counteracts the habitual tendency to become identified with our thoughts or to believe we must control them. Beginners to Zazen often report being surprised at just how active their minds are when they first sit down to practice. One practitioner described it as discovering I had been living with a wild monkey in my head all along, but I never noticed because I was too busy following it wherever it went. This recognition itself is valuable. We can't work skillfully with overthinking if we don't first clearly see its nature and extent. What makes Zazen particularly powerful for addressing overthinking is that it changes our relationship to thinking rather than attempting to change the thoughts themselves. Through regular practice, we begin to recognize that we are not our thoughts. We are the awareness in which thoughts appear and disappear. This shift in perspective creates a sense of spaciousness around thinking that naturally reduces its grip on our experience. Neuroscientific research has begun to validate what Zen practitioners have understood for centuries. Studies using fMRI scans show that long-term meditation practice is associated with reduced activity in the default mode network, the brain regions responsible for self-referential thinking and mind-wandering. Additionally, regular meditation practice appears to strengthen the anterior cingulate cortex, which helps us disengage from distracting thoughts and return our attention to the present moment. A common misconception about Zazen is that its goal is to achieve a thought-free state. This misunderstanding leads many beginners to believe they're failing when thoughts continue to arise during practice. Zen teachers consistently emphasize that the aim isn't to eliminate thinking, but to see thoughts for what they are, temporary mental events rather than solid realities requiring our complete identification. As one Zen master put it, the goal isn't to not have thoughts, but to not be had by thoughts. The structure of traditional Zazen practice can be particularly helpful for those dealing with severe overthinking. In Zen monasteries, formal Zazen periods typically alternate with kinhin, or walking meditation. This alternation recognizes the reality that maintaining awareness through different postures and activities helps integrate mindfulness into daily life. Additionally, the communal aspect of practice in Zen centers provides support and accountability that many find helpful in establishing regular practice. For those new to Zazen, starting with brief periods is advisable. Even 5 to 10 minutes of daily practice can begin to cultivate the mental muscles needed to work effectively with overthinking. Gradually increasing duration as comfort develops allows the practice to deepen naturally. Many people find that early morning practice, before the day's activities begin to occupy the mind, is particularly effective. What distinguishes Zazen from many contemporary mindfulness approaches is its emphasis on goallessness. While modern mindfulness is often presented as a means to reduce stress, improve focus, or enhance well-being, traditional Zazen is practiced without seeking any particular outcome. This paradoxical approach of meditation without gaining ideas can be especially freeing for those caught in achievement-oriented overthinking. When we sit without trying to get anywhere or become anything, we may discover that the peace we've been seeking has been present all along beneath the surface of our busy minds. The simplicity of Zazen makes it accessible to anyone, regardless of religious or philosophical beliefs. While embedded in Buddhist tradition, the core practice of sitting with awareness of breath and body, while allowing thoughts to come and go, can be beneficial regardless of one's spiritual orientation. This universal applicability has contributed to Zazen's growing popularity in secular contexts, from corporate mindfulness programs to healthcare settings. Perhaps the most profound teaching that Zazen offers to those struggling with overthinking is that we don't need to fix or improve our minds to find peace. The thinking mind, with all its activity and creativity, is not the enemy of tranquility, but simply one aspect of our complete experience. By sitting with thoughts rather than being driven by them, we discover a dimension of awareness that remains stable and spacious regardless of mental weather. While Zazen provides a structured way to work directly with thoughts in formal meditation, the Zen tradition also offers wisdom about transcending overthinking and active pursuits through the famous story of the Zen archer. This traditional tale illustrates how analytical thinking can actually interfere with natural performance and how we can access a state of effortless focus beyond mental chatter. The story centers on a master archer named Kenzo, who had achieved technical perfection in archery, but felt something was missing from his practice. Despite his skill, he noticed a subtle tension and self-consciousness that prevented total freedom in his shooting. Seeking deeper mastery, he journeyed to a remote Zen monastery where an old master was said to have achieved extraordinary skill in archery. Upon meeting the Zen master, Kenzo proudly demonstrated his impressive technical abilities. His arrows consistently hit the bullseye, splitting previous arrows with new ones. After observing silently, the master nodded and said, "Your technique is excellent, but you're too present in your shooting. Come back tomorrow and we will begin." The training that followed was unlike anything Kenzo had experienced. Rather than focusing on archery technique, the master had him sit in meditation for hours, teaching him to observe his breath and the subtle sensations throughout his body. When they did practice archery, the master emphasized a state of mind rather than physical technique. "Do not shoot with your muscles," the master instructed. "Shoot with your whole being. Do not try to hit the target. Become one with it, and the arrow will find its own way." Days turned into weeks as Kenzo struggled with this approach. Whenever he tried to analyze his shooting or consciously perfect his aim, the master would stop him immediately. "You are thinking about hitting the target," the master would say. "As long as you have two, you and the target, you will never understand true archery." The breakthrough came unexpectedly one evening, as Kenzo practiced drawing his bow without arrows, an exercise the master had assigned to develop proper form without concern for results. As the sun set and the target became barely visible in the dimming light, Kenzo found himself drawing the bow without his usual mental commentary. In that moment, the distinction between himself, the bow, and the target seemed to dissolve. When he released the bowstring, he felt as though he was simply witnessing the action rather than performing it. Seeing this shift, the master handed Kenzo an arrow. "Now shoot," he said quietly. Without thinking, Kenzo nocked the arrow, drew the bow, and released. all as one continuous movement without mental deliberation. The arrow flew straight to the center of the target, but Kenzo realized that hitting the bullseye was no longer the point. Something fundamental had changed in his experience of archery itself. This story illustrates what Zen practitioners call mushin, or no mind, a state of consciousness where action flows naturally, without the interference of analytical thinking or self-consciousness. It's not that thinking disappears entirely, but rather that it assumes its proper role as servant rather than master of action. In this state, the overthinking that typically accompanies performance anxiety or excessive self-monitoring drops away, allowing innate skill to express itself without hindrance. Modern sports psychology has recognized the wisdom in this ancient teaching. Research on peak performance consistently shows that athletes perform best when in flow state, a condition remarkably similar to mushin, characterized by complete absorption in activity, loss of self-consciousness, and a sense of effortless action. What blocks flow is precisely the kind of overthinking that the Zen master was helping Kenzo transcend. The archer's story has practical implications for anyone dealing with overthinking in performance situations, whether athletic, artistic, or professional. It suggests that excellence comes not from more analysis, but from integrating knowledge so thoroughly that it becomes embodied wisdom operating below the level of conscious thought. This doesn't mean abandoning learning or technique. Kenzo's technical mastery was essential, but rather allowing technique to become so internalized that it operates without constant mental supervision. Specific practices derived from the Zen archery tradition can help modern practitioners move beyond overthinking in their own pursuits. One approach involves identifying pre-performance rituals that help transition from analytical mind to embodied presence. For some, this might involve conscious breathing or body scanning to ground awareness in physical sensation rather than mental commentary. Others find that specific visualization practices help bypass the overthinking mind and connect directly with intuitive knowledge. Another key insight from the archery story concerns our relationship with outcomes. Kenzo's breakthrough came when he stopped fixating on hitting the target and instead immersed himself completely in the process of drawing the bow. This shift from outcome focus to process focus is consistently identified as crucial for moving beyond performance anxiety and the overthinking it generates. Organizations increasingly recognize the value of these Zen-inspired approaches for addressing the overthinking that plagues many high-performance environments. Some companies now incorporate practices designed to help teams access collective flow states where collaboration happens more naturally and creative solutions emerge without the hindrance of overthinking. These practices often involve creating protected spaces where the constant pressure for analysis and justification is temporarily suspended, allowing intuitive intelligence to operate more freely. What's particularly valuable about the Zen archery approach is its recognition that different kinds of intelligence operate at different levels of consciousness. The analytical mind excels at planning and evaluation but can interfere with execution. By learning to shift between these modes appropriately, using analysis during preparation, and then releasing into mushin during performance, we can work more harmoniously with our complete cognitive capacities. The story of the Zen archer reminds us that overthinking often stems from an imbalance where we've come to overly identify with our analytical mind while losing touch with other dimensions of intelligence: somatic, intuitive, and emotional. The path beyond overthinking involves not rejecting thought, but finding its proper place within a larger ecology of knowing that includes the wisdom of the body and the direct perception that becomes available when the chattering mind temporarily subsides. The story of the Zen archer reveals how overthinking can obstruct our natural abilities, particularly in moments of performance. This same wisdom applies not just to specialized skills like archery, but to the broader practice of mindfulness itself. One of the most powerful Zen parables addressing this is the story of the stonecutter, which teaches us about patience and persistent practice in developing mindfulness as an antidote to overthinking. This ancient story tells of a stonecutter who works steadily at breaking apart a massive boulder. Day after day he strikes the stone with his hammer, delivering blow after blow without any visible effect. His routine is simple but unwavering. He arrives each morning, positions himself before the boulder, and begins striking it methodically. To passers-by, his efforts appear futile. The stone shows no cracks, no signs of weakening. Many wonder why he persists in what seems like an exercise in frustration. One day, on what appears to be his 1000th strike, something remarkable happens. The boulder doesn't just crack slightly, it splits completely in two. A witness to this event approaches the stonecutter and remarks, "That was amazing! You finally succeeded on that one blow after so many failed attempts." The stonecutter smiles knowingly and responds, "The final blow did not split the stone. It was the combined effect of all the previous strikes. The last one simply completed what had already been set in motion." This parable contains profound wisdom about the nature of mindfulness practice and its relationship to overthinking. Many people approach meditation or mindfulness practices with expectations of immediate results. They sit for 20 minutes, hoping their overthinking mind will suddenly quiet down, only to become discouraged when thoughts continue racing. The Stonecutter's story teaches us that transformation doesn't typically happen through dramatic breakthroughs but through consistent, patient practice over time. The invisibility of progress is a crucial element of this story. For hundreds of strikes, the stonecutter couldn't see any external evidence that his work was having an effect. Similarly, when we practice mindfulness, internal changes are occurring that may not be immediately apparent to us. Each moment of returned awareness, each recognition of being caught in overthinking, creates microscopic changes in our neural pathways. These changes accumulate below the threshold of our awareness, until eventually, like the stone that suddenly splits, we notice a significant shift in our relationship to thinking. This teaching directly counteracts one of the main obstacles practitioners face: the overthinking mind's demand for measurable progress. Our analytical brain wants evidence that practice is working, and when it doesn't see immediate results, it generates doubts and judgments that can lead us to abandon practice. "This isn't working," the thinking mind declares after a few difficult meditation sessions. The stonecutter's perseverance reminds us that transformation operates according to its own timeline, not according to our expectations or demands. Neuroscience now confirms what this ancient parable suggests. The brain changes through a process called neuroplasticity, but these changes require consistent practice over time. Research shows that meditation practice leads to structural and functional changes in brain regions associated with attention, emotional regulation, and self-awareness. However, these changes don't happen overnight. They accumulate gradually through regular practice, just as the stone weakens imperceptibly with each strike until the final breakthrough occurs. The stonecutter's approach also teaches us about the quality of attention needed for effective practice. He didn't strike the stone randomly or with fluctuating intensity. Each blow was delivered with focus and precision, hitting the same spot consistently. Similarly, effective mindfulness practice involves bringing the same quality of attention back to our anchor, whether breath, body sensations, or other focal points, again and again with patience and precision. For those struggling with severe overthinking, the stonecutter's story offers particular encouragement. It's common to feel that your mind is like an impenetrable boulder, solid, unyielding, and seemingly permanent in its patterns. The parable suggests that even the most entrenched mental habits can change through persistent practice. Each time you notice yourself overthinking and gently bring awareness back to the present moment, you're delivering another strike to the boulder of habitual thought patterns. This story also highlights the importance of faith in the practice process. The stonecutter continued his work without external validation or visible progress. He trusted in the process itself. Similarly, mindfulness practice requires a certain faith that consistent attention to the present moment will eventually transform our relationship with thinking, even when evidence of change isn't immediately apparent. In practical terms, the stonecutter's approach suggests several principles for working with an overthinking mind. First, consistency matters more than duration. A brief daily practice maintained over months will likely yield more benefit than occasional lengthy sessions. Second, patience with the process is essential. Understanding that the splitting of the stone may not occur according to our preferred timeline helps prevent discouragement. Finally, precision in practice matters. Continuing to bring attention back to the same focal point builds the mental muscle needed to work effectively with overthinking. Organizations implementing mindfulness programs have found the stonecutter's wisdom particularly relevant. When introducing mindfulness practices in workplace settings, setting realistic expectations about the gradual nature of change helps prevent disappointment and abandonment of practice. Many companies now structure their well-being initiatives around consistent brief practices rather than occasional intensive sessions, recognizing that lasting change comes through regular reinforcement rather than sporadic effort. The Stonecutter's story reminds us that the path beyond overthinking isn't found through dramatic breakthroughs or special experiences, but through patient, consistent attention to the ordinary moments of awareness. Each time we recognize we've been carried away by thinking and gently return to present moment awareness, we're delivering another strike to the boulder of habitual patterns. Though we may not see immediate results, these moments of practice accumulate, eventually creating the conditions for fundamental transformation in our relationship with thinking. While the Stonecutter teaches us about patience and persistence in stationary practice, Buddhism also offers powerful techniques for bringing mindfulness into movement through the practice of Kinhin or walking meditation. This practice serves as a bridge between seated meditation and daily activities, showing us how to maintain mindful awareness while in motion, an essential skill for preventing overthinking during active daily life. Traditionally practiced between periods of seated meditation in Zen monasteries, Kinhin follows specific formal guidelines. Practitioners typically walk clockwise around the meditation hall in a single line. The pace is extremely slow, much slower than normal walking, with each step broken down into distinct components. The practitioner first lifts the foot, moves it forward, and then places it down, coordinating each movement with the breath. The hands are positioned in a specific mudra, ritual gesture, usually held at the center of the chest. What makes Kinhin particularly effective for addressing overthinking is its focus on direct physical sensation rather than abstract thought. When walking mindfully, attention is directed to the feeling of the foot lifting off the ground, the sensation of movement through space, and the contact as the foot reconnects with the floor. These immediate physical experiences naturally draw the mind away from rumination and into present moment awareness. The deliberately slow pace of traditional Kinhin serves an important purpose. By slowing down movement to a fraction of our normal speed, we can observe processes that usually happen too quickly for conscious awareness. We begin to notice how many micro-movements and sensations comprise even a simple action, like taking a step. This heightened awareness of physical process helps disrupt the abstract, future-oriented thinking that characterizes overthinking. The coordination of breath with movement adds another dimension to the practice. Practitioners typically synchronize their steps with their breathing, perhaps taking one step per inhalation and one per exhalation. This breath-movement coordination creates a rhythmic, meditative quality that helps stabilize attention. When mind and body move as one synchronized system, the tendency toward mental proliferation naturally diminishes. Modern neuroscience has begun to validate the unique benefits of walking meditation. Research indicates that practices combining movement with mindfulness activate different neural networks than seated meditation alone. This suggests that walking meditation might offer complementary benefits, potentially reaching aspects of our cognitive system that remain untouched by stationary practice. For people whose overthinking intensifies during stillness, walking meditation can provide an accessible entry point to mindfulness. Unlike seated meditation, which can sometimes feel removed from everyday life, walking meditation directly addresses how we can bring mindfulness into ordinary activities. Most of us spend considerable time each day walking, from room to room, to and from our cars, through grocery store aisles, or along sidewalks. By practicing formal Kinhin, we develop skills that can transform these routine movements into opportunities for presence, effectively reducing the time available for mind-wandering and overthinking. The formal practice of Kinhin can be adapted for contemporary life in numerous ways. While traditional practice might involve walking extremely slowly in a meditation hall, modern practitioners often apply the principles of Kinhin to regular paced walking in various settings. Some people designate certain walking routes, perhaps from parking lot to office or around a local park, as opportunities for mindful attention. Others use transitional moments, like walking through doorways, as bells of mindfulness that prompt a return to awareness of movement and breath. What distinguishes mindful walking from regular walking is the quality of attention brought to the experience. In ordinary walking, we typically operate on autopilot with attention elsewhere while the body moves. In Kinhin, movement and attention are unified. We're fully present with the act of walking itself rather than using the body's movement as a backdrop for planning, worrying, or rehearsing conversations. all forms of overthinking that typically consume our awareness during routine activities. For those dealing with anxiety-driven overthinking, walking meditation offers particular benefits. Research has shown that rhythmic, bilateral movement, alternating left-right, has a regulating effect on the nervous system. When combined with mindful awareness, this movement pattern can help interrupt anxiety spirals and bring the body-mind system back into balance. Many therapists now recommend mindful walking as part of treatment protocols for anxiety disorders, characterized by excessive worry and rumination. Organizations have begun incorporating walking meetings and mindful movement breaks into workplace routines, recognizing that movement can help disrupt the overthinking that often characterizes knowledge work. Some companies create designated walking paths on their campuses, while others schedule regular walking breaks, where employees are encouraged to step away from desks and move mindfully, whether outside or through office hallways. These practices acknowledge that changing physical state can directly impact mental state. The practice of Kinhin reminds us that mindfulness isn't confined to quiet rooms or meditation cushions. It can be integrated into every movement throughout our day. By bringing awareness to ordinary walking, we reclaim countless minutes that would otherwise be lost to overthinking. The simple act of feeling our feet connect with the earth, noticing the sensation of air on our skin, and experiencing the rhythm of our breathing while walking creates a natural interruption to mental proliferation. In essence, Kinhin teaches us that movement itself can be meditation when approached with appropriate attention. This understanding liberates mindfulness practice from the constraints of formal sitting sessions and extends it into the active dimensions of life where overthinking often flourishes unchecked. By learning to unify mind and body in something as fundamental as walking, we develop a portable mindfulness practice that can accompany us throughout our daily activities, gradually reducing the mental space available for unproductive rumination. While walking meditation teaches us to bring mindfulness into motion, Zen tradition also offers a practice that works through stillness and visual contemplation, the Zen rock garden. Moving from the dynamic practice of Kinhin to the serene contemplation of these carefully arranged spaces shows how Buddhism addresses overthinking through diverse approaches targeting different sensory channels and mental tendencies. Japanese rock gardens, known as karasansui or dry landscape gardens, represent one of the most distinctive expressions of Zen aesthetics. These minimalist spaces typically consist of carefully placed rocks on beds of meticulously raked white gravel or sand, occasionally incorporating sparse vegetation like moss or carefully pruned trees. Unlike Western gardens that often emphasize abundant flowers and symmetrical designs, Zen gardens embrace simplicity, asymmetry, and empty space as their defining characteristics. The most famous example, Rionji Temple Garden in Kyoto, features 15 rocks arranged on a rectangular bed of white gravel. From any viewing angle, at least one rock is always hidden from sight, a deliberate design choice reflecting the Zen understanding that complete knowledge is never possible. This garden, created over 500 years ago, continues to attract visitors from around the world who sit in contemplation before its deceptively simple arrangement. The relationship between these gardens and overthinking lies in both their creation and contemplation. The act of raking the gravel into precise patterns requires complete attention to the present moment. As garden caretakers draw their rake through the gravel, creating parallel lines or concentric circles around the stones, their attention must remain fully on the task at hand. Any wandering of the mind immediately shows in the pattern a crooked line or inconsistent spacing. This immediate feedback creates a perfect training ground for present moment awareness. For those observing the garden, these spaces function as external representations of the ordered mind that meditation aims to cultivate. The clean, open expanses of raked gravel represent the clarity of awareness, while the rocks might represent thoughts or experiences that exist within this awareness, without disturbing its fundamental nature. When we overthink, our mental landscape resembles chaotic, disturbed sand with no clear pattern or space. The Zen garden offers a visual reminder of how our minds might appear when thinking assumes its proper proportion within the larger field of awareness. Central to Zen garden design is the Japanese concept of ma, the conscious appreciation of empty space. Western minds often perceive emptiness as lack or absence, something to be filled. In Japanese aesthetics, empty space isn't absence but presence with its own value and meaning. This perspective directly challenges the overthinking mind, which compulsively fills every mental space with content. By appreciating the importance of emptiness in the garden's design, visitors begin to recognize how mental space, gaps between thoughts, holds equal importance to the thoughts themselves. The practice of contemplating a Zen garden involves more than casual viewing. Traditionally, visitors sit in a designated viewing area, often on a veranda overlooking the garden, and engage in sustained attention to what's before them. Rather than analysing the garden intellectually or judging its aesthetic qualities, the practice involves opening to direct sensory experience, noticing textures, shadows, the relationship between elements, and how these change with shifting light or weather conditions. This receptive attention naturally draws the mind away from analytical, overthinking and into direct perception. Neuroscientifically, what happens during garden contemplation has interesting parallels with meditation. Research suggests that viewing natural scenes or patterns with fractal qualities, self-similar patterns at different scales, induces alpha brainwaves associated with relaxed alertness. The patterns of raked sand and the natural irregularity of stones likely contribute to this effect, creating physiological conditions conducive to mental quiet without requiring direct effort to stop thinking. Modern adaptations have made the principles of Zen gardens accessible for contemporary practitioners. Desktop Zen gardens, featuring miniature rakes and sand trays with small stones, have become popular tools for mindfulness in office environments. While simplified, these miniature versions still offer the essential experience of creating order in an external space as a reflection of internal ordering. The physical act of raking patterns serves as a brief but effective interruption to digital overwhelm and mental proliferation. Organizations have also begun incorporating Zen garden principles into workplace design, creating contemplative spaces where employees can temporarily step away from information overload. These spaces typically feature minimalist design, natural elements, and reduced sensory stimulation, environmental qualities that naturally support a transition from overthinking to present moment awareness. Some companies report that even brief periods of access to such spaces significantly improve focus and creative problem solving. Creating a personal Zen garden, whether full-sized in a yard or in miniature form, offers a tangible way to work with overthinking tendencies. The process begins with selecting an appropriate space and materials: stones with interesting shapes and textures, fine gravel or sand that will hold patterns, and a suitable container or defined area. The creation itself becomes a mindfulness practice, as each decision about placement requires presence and attention rather than abstract analysis. Once established, the garden serves multiple functions in addressing overthinking. Daily or weekly raking becomes a regular mindfulness practice that grounds awareness in physical sensation and visual perception. The garden also serves as a visual reminder of mental clarity, something we can literally see before us, even when internal clarity feels elusive. Finally, regular contemplation of the garden trains the capacity for non-analytical awareness that can transfer to other aspects of life. What makes Zen gardens particularly effective against overthinking is their indirect approach. Rather than directly fighting against thoughts, which often intensifies them, garden contemplation gently shifts attention to direct perception. This bypass strategy often works more effectively than head-on confrontation with overthinking patterns. When absorbed in the visual simplicity of rocks and sand, the mind naturally settles without force or struggle. The wisdom of the Zen garden reminds us that sometimes the most effective response to internal chaos isn't more internal effort, but creating external conditions that naturally evoke order and tranquility. Just as the garden doesn't fight against the stones but incorporates them harmoniously within the larger space, we learn to accommodate thoughts within the spacious awareness that contains them, neither suppressing them nor becoming completely identified with them. While Zen gardens work through visual contemplation to quiet the overthinking mind, another powerful Zen technique operates through intellectual challenge, the koan. One of the most famous koans, "What is the sound of one hand?", often mistranslated as the sound of one hand clapping, was specifically designed by the 18th century Zen master Hakuin to break through patterns of conceptual thinking that fuel overthinking. Unlike the peaceful contemplation of a rock garden, working with koans feels initially like intense mental effort. The practitioner is given a seemingly nonsensical question or statement that cannot be resolved through ordinary logical thinking. What is the sound of one hand presents an immediate paradox. We know that sound typically requires contact between two objects, so how could a single hand alone make sound? This deliberate logical impossibility is precisely what gives the koan its power to disrupt our usual thought patterns. When first encountering this koan, students typically respond by trying to analyze it, looking for clever interpretations or hidden meanings. They might offer philosophical answers or poetic metaphors. In traditional Zen training, the teacher would reject all such intellectual approaches, often wordlessly, or with a simple gesture indicating "not yet." This consistent rejection of analytical solutions gradually leads the student to a crucial realization: this puzzle cannot be solved by the thinking mind. It requires a fundamentally different mode of understanding. The frustration that develops through this process serves an important purpose. As students exhaust all possible conceptual approaches without satisfaction, they eventually reach what Zen tradition calls great doubt, a state of cognitive impasse where the thinking mind recognizes its own limitations. This experience of hitting a mental wall can be uncomfortable, but is considered essential for breakthrough. It's only when we fully experience the limitations of conceptual thinking that we become open to other ways of knowing. What makes the sound of one hand particularly effective against overthinking is how it directly confronts our reliance on dualistic thinking. Our ordinary thought processes depend on categories and oppositions: self, other, subject, object, right, wrong, inside, outside. The koan deliberately presents a situation that cannot be understood within this framework. One hand alone doesn't fit our conceptual system that requires two things interacting to produce sound. This challenge to dualistic thinking strikes at the very root of the overthinking pattern, which thrives on endless distinctions and categorizations. In traditional Zen training, students would meditate intensively on this koan, carrying it with them throughout all daily activities. They weren't expected to set aside time to think about the koan, but rather to become the koan, to embody the question so completely that it permeated every aspect of experience. This total immersion created conditions where insight could occur unexpectedly, often during ordinary activities when the analytical mind had temporarily relaxed its grip. When students believed they had grasped the essence of the koan, they would meet with their teacher in a private interview called sanzen or dokusan. Rather than explaining their understanding verbally, they would typically demonstrate it through spontaneous gesture or action. The teacher could immediately discern whether the student had merely reached an intellectual interpretation or had experienced a genuine breakthrough beyond conceptual thinking. This distinction is crucial. True koan work results not in new concepts but in a different relationship to thinking itself. Modern neuroscience offers interesting perspectives on what might be happening during koan practice. Some researchers suggest that the sustained impossible cognitive task creates conditions for temporary deactivation of brain networks involved in self-referential thinking and narrative processing. When these networks quiet down, other modes of brain function can emerge more prominently, particularly those involved in direct perception and intuitive understanding. This shift in neural activity might correspond to the experiential shift Zen practitioners report when working with koans. For contemporary practitioners interested in this approach to overthinking, formal koan study traditionally requires working with a qualified teacher. However, the principle of using paradox to interrupt habitual thinking can be explored informally. Simply holding questions that have no definitive answers, what is experiencing this moment, or who am I beyond my thoughts, can create small interruptions in conceptual thinking that accumulate over time. The difference between philosophical contemplation and koan practice lies in the intended outcome. Philosophy typically aims at better concepts or more coherent systems of thought. Koan practice aims at experiential recognition of what lies beyond conceptual thinking altogether. This distinction is crucial for addressing overthinking, which isn't solved through better or more organized thoughts, but through recognizing the limited nature of thinking itself. Organizations dealing with complex challenges have adapted koan-like approaches to break through analytical gridlock. When teams become stuck in circular discussions or paralyzed by excessive analysis, introducing deliberately paradoxical questions can disrupt habitual thinking patterns and create openings for creative solutions. Innovation often emerges not from more thorough analysis, but from temporarily stepping outside established conceptual frameworks. The sound of one hand continues to resonate with contemporary seekers because it addresses a universal human experience, the limitations of our conceptual understanding, and the freedom that becomes available when we recognize these limitations. In a culture that increasingly equates intelligence with analytical thinking, koans offer a radical counter-perspective. Some forms of understanding emerge only when thinking itself is temporarily suspended or transcended. For those caught in overthinking patterns, this ancient practice offers not just a technique, but a fundamentally different relationship with thought itself, one where thinking becomes a useful tool rather than the primary definer of identity and experience. While koans like the sound of one hand work to disrupt conceptual thinking through paradox, Zen Buddhism also offers more direct, embodied practices for calming the overthinking mind. Among these, breathing practices hold a central place in the tradition, providing an ever-present anchor for consciousness that's available in any circumstance. These breathing rituals create a natural bridge between formal meditation and everyday life, offering practical tools for interrupting overthinking patterns wherever they arise. In Zen monasteries, conscious breathing forms the foundation of all other practices. One of the most basic techniques, called Susoku-kan in Japanese, involves simply counting breaths, typically from 1 to 10 before starting again. This seemingly elementary practice quickly reveals how easily attention wanders. Many beginners discover they rarely reach 10 without the mind drifting into thought, forgetting the count entirely. This immediate feedback makes breath counting particularly effective for recognizing overthinking as it happens. What distinguishes Zen breathing practices from some other approaches is their emphasis on natural breathing rather than controlled breathing. Instead of manipulating the breath through specific patterns or rhythms, practitioners are instructed to simply observe the breath as it naturally occurs. This non-interventionist approach reflects a core Zen principle, that our fundamental nature is already complete and whole, requiring recognition rather than improvement or manipulation. The Zen approach to breath awareness typically begins with attention to physical sensations. Practitioners might notice the feeling of air passing through the nostrils, the expansion and contraction of the abdomen, or the subtle movement of the chest. By anchoring attention in these concrete, immediate sensations, the mind is drawn away from abstract thought and into direct experience. This shift from conceptual to sensory awareness naturally interrupts the overthinking process without creating additional mental content. For those dealing with severe overthinking, Zen teachers often recommend bringing attention specifically to the out-breath and the pause that follows it. This phase of the breathing cycle naturally corresponds with a slight relaxation in the body and a momentary quieting of mental activity. By gently emphasizing awareness of the exhalation, practitioners can access brief but regular moments of mental quiet that gradually extend with practice. One particularly effective Zen breathing practice for overthinking involves expanding awareness to include the entire body breathing. Rather than focusing narrowly on the breath at the nostrils or abdomen, this practice invites practitioners to sense how the entire body participates in the breathing process, how the back expands slightly, how the shoulders might rise and fall, how even the extremities seem to pulse subtly with each breath cycle. This whole body awareness creates a broader attentional field that can more easily accommodate thoughts without becoming identified with them. The physiological effects of conscious breathing help explain its effectiveness against overthinking. Extended exhalations activate the parasympathetic nervous system, often called the rest and digest mode, which counteracts the stress response associated with rumination and worry. Additionally, full attention to breathing naturally slows the respiratory rate, which has been shown to reduce activity in brain regions associated with anxious thinking and self-referential processing. Modern research increasingly validates what Zen practitioners have understood for centuries. Studies using fMRI scanning show that attention to breath activates brain regions associated with present-moment awareness, while reducing activity in the default mode network responsible for mind-wandering and self-referential thinking. Even brief periods of breath awareness, as little as 3 to 5 minutes, can create measurable shifts in brain activity away from patterns associated with overthinking. The portability of breathing practices makes them particularly valuable for addressing overthinking in daily life. Unlike techniques that require specific postures or environments, breath awareness can be practiced anywhere, during a stressful meeting, while stuck in traffic, or in the middle of a difficult conversation. Some practitioners develop personal cues to remind themselves to return to breath awareness throughout the day, such as whenever they check the time, walk through a doorway, or hear a phone ring. In Japanese Zen, the term hakushu refers to returning to breath awareness between periods of activity, like briefly touching home base before venturing out again. This approach recognizes that continuity of awareness through changing activities and environments is the ultimate aim of practice. By regularly touching in with breath throughout the day, we create a thread of mindfulness that can help prevent overthinking from dominating our experience even during busy periods. Organizations implementing mindfulness programs have found breath-based practices particularly accessible and effective. Unlike more complex or time-consuming approaches, simple breath awareness can be integrated into the workday through brief, mindful minutes between meetings or tasks. Some companies have created designated spaces for employees to practice brief breathing exercises, while others incorporate short guided practices at the beginning of meetings to help participants arrive fully in the present moment. The simplicity of breath practice is both its greatest strength and its greatest challenge. Because it requires no special equipment, postures, or environments, it's always available as a resource against overthinking. However, this very simplicity can lead the thinking mind to dismiss it as too basic or ineffective. Many begin breath practice expecting dramatic experiences or immediate results, only to abandon it when ordinary awareness of breathing seems underwhelming compared to the mind's expectations for real meditation. Zen teachers emphasize that the transformative power of breath awareness comes not from extraordinary experiences, but from the cumulative effect of returning attention to this simple anchor thousands of times. Each return to breath interrupts the momentum of thinking, gradually weakening habitual thought patterns and strengthening the capacity to rest in direct experience. Like water slowly wearing away stone, regular breath awareness gradually reshapes our relationship with thinking, not through force but through gentle persistence. For those seeking to establish a regular breath practice, Zen suggests starting with brief but frequent periods rather than occasional longer sessions. 5 minutes of breath awareness practiced 3 or 4 times daily often proves more effective against overthinking than a single weekly session of 45 minutes. This frequency helps integrate mindfulness into the rhythm of daily life, rather than treating it as a separate activity. The essential teaching of Zen breathing practices is that the antidote to overthinking already exists within us, in the simple, ever-present rhythm of our own breathing. By returning attention to this natural process that continues reliably, whether we notice it or not, we access a dimension of experience that exists prior to and independent of conceptual thought. This recognition gradually loosens thinking's grip on our awareness, not by fighting against thoughts, but by grounding consciousness in the direct, embodied experience that thinking so often obscures. While breathing practices offer a tangible physical anchor for awareness, Buddhism also provides conceptual frameworks that help us understand why overthinking occurs in the first place. One of the most powerful is captured in the famous metaphor of the finger pointing to the moon, which addresses a fundamental confusion that fuels excessive thinking. This teaching helps us distinguish between concepts about reality and direct experience itself, between the finger of our ideas and the moon of what they're meant to indicate. The origin of this metaphor comes from Buddhist sutras where the Buddha warns disciples not to mistake his teachings, the finger, for the direct realization they point toward, the moon. In one version, the Buddha holds up his finger, directing attention to the moon, then asks, "When I point to the moon, do you look at my finger or the moon?" The lesson is clear. Teachings, concepts, and words are merely pointers toward direct experience, not substitutes for it. This seemingly simple distinction addresses the root of much overthinking. Our minds naturally create maps, models, and representations of reality that help us navigate life. These conceptual frameworks serve important purposes, but problems arise when we mistake these mental constructs for the direct experiences they represent. We begin living in our ideas about life rather than in life itself, creating the conditions for endless mental proliferation. Consider how this pattern operates in daily experience. When meeting someone new, we quickly form concepts about who they are based on initial impressions. These concepts become mental filters through which we interpret all subsequent interactions. potentially preventing us from actually experiencing the person as they are in each new moment. Similarly, after visiting a beautiful location, we might find ourselves lost in memories and descriptions rather than fully present to new experiences as they unfold. In both cases, we've mistaken the finger, our concepts, for the moon, direct experience. Overthinking thrives precisely in this gap between concept and direct experience. When caught in rumination, we're typically engaged with mental representations, memories of the past, projections about the future, evaluations of ourselves or others, rather than with immediate present moment experience. These representations trigger further thoughts in an endless chain, each leading away from direct experience rather than toward it. The Buddhist solution isn't to eliminate concepts entirely, they serve essential functions in human life, but to recognize them for what they are, tools for navigation rather than the territory itself. This recognition creates a fundamental shift in our relationship with thinking. Instead of being completely identified with our thoughts, believing they directly represent reality, we begin to hold them more lightly, seeing them as provisional maps that may or may not accurately reflect the landscape of direct experience. Practices that help distinguish between the finger and the moon take various forms. Some involve deliberately shifting attention from thought to direct sensory experience, from concepts about what's happening to the actual sensations, sounds, and sights of the present moment. Others involve noticing the qualities of thoughts themselves, their transience, their constructed nature, the felt sense of believing or disbelieving them, rather than just their content. One particularly effective practice involves identifying reality statements in our thinking, claims about what is definitely true or real, and holding them more tentatively. Rather than thinking, "this is boring," mistaking our judgment for reality itself, we might notice, "I'm having the thought that this is boring," recognizing the thought as a construct rather than an absolute truth. This small linguistic shift creates crucial space between direct experience and our conceptual overlays. The distinction between finger and moon becomes especially important during meditation or mindfulness practice. Many practitioners become fixated on concepts about what meditation should be like, expectations of peace, clarity, or special states, rather than simply experiencing whatever is actually present. This fixation creates a circular problem where thinking about meditation interferes with the direct experience meditation is meant to foster. Modern psychology has developed approaches that parallel this ancient Buddhist wisdom. Cognitive diffusion techniques in acceptance and commitment therapy help clients recognize thoughts as mental events rather than direct representations of reality. Similarly, metacognitive awareness in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy involves recognizing thoughts as thoughts rather than facts. These contemporary approaches confirm through clinical research what Buddhist traditions have taught for centuries, that liberation from overthinking begins with recognizing the difference between our concepts and the experiences they attempt to describe. For organizations dealing with analysis paralysis or information overload, the finger-pointing to the moon teaching offers valuable perspective. Many workplace environments unconsciously prioritize conceptual knowledge, reports, analyses, plans, over direct experience, actually trying things, gathering first-hand data, learning through doing. Teams that balance conceptual understanding with experiential learning typically make better decisions and avoid the overthinking traps that plague purely analytical approaches. The practical application of this teaching isn't to abandon thinking, but to develop a more skillful relationship with it. We learn to use concepts when they're helpful, without being completely identified with them. Like a carpenter who knows when to use each tool and when to set it down, we develop discernment about when conceptual thinking serves us, and when direct experience would be more valuable. This balanced approach allows thinking to assume its proper place as one aspect of human intelligence, rather than its entirety. What makes this teaching particularly liberating is its recognition that freedom from overthinking doesn't require eliminating or controlling thoughts. Instead, it comes through a perceptual shift, recognizing thoughts as fingers pointing rather than the moon itself. This recognition naturally loosens thinking's grip on our awareness, without creating an internal battle against thoughts. We don't need fewer thoughts. We need clearer seeing of what thoughts actually are. The finger pointing to the moon teaching reminds us that concepts and words, including all the explanations in this very discussion, are merely pointers toward direct experience. True freedom from overthinking isn't found in better concepts about overthinking, but in the direct recognition of our nature beyond concepts altogether. This recognition doesn't come through more sophisticated thinking, but through moments of clear seeing, when we distinguish between the maps our minds create and the territory of direct experience they attempt to represent. Understanding the difference between our concepts and direct experience provides a practical foundation for approaching daily activities with mindfulness. This wisdom becomes particularly valuable when applied to one of our most fundamental daily necessities, eating. The formal meal practices in Zen monasteries offer profound insights into transforming this routine activity into a powerful practice for interrupting overthinking patterns and cultivating moment-to-moment awareness. In traditional Zen monasteries, meals are conducted as formal meditation practices called oryoki, which literally means just enough. This ritualized approach to eating transforms what many of us do mindlessly into an opportunity for complete presence. Every aspect of the monastic meal, from the arrangement of bowls to the way food is received, consumed, and cleaned up afterward, is performed with precise attention and reverence. The ritual begins with the proper arrangement of eating bowls, utensils, and cloths, each placed in a specific position according to centuries-old tradition. This careful preparation creates a transition from other activities, signaling to the mind that something worthy of full attention is about to occur. Even before food arrives, practitioners are already practicing presence through this mindful setup process. When food is served, monastics receive each dish with a slight bow, acknowledging the gift of nourishment and the countless beings who contributed to bringing it to the table, from farmers and transporters to cooks and servers. This practice of gratitude naturally interrupts self-centered thinking patterns that fuel overthinking, broadening awareness beyond personal concerns to include the vast network of interconnection that makes each meal possible. Before eating begins, practitioners typically observe a moment of reflection, silently contemplating 5 points: the effort that brought this food to them, their own worthiness to receive it, the importance of avoiding negative mind states like greed or aversion while eating, the recognition of food as nourishment for the body rather than merely pleasure for the taste buds, and awareness of how this nourishment supports their practice and service to others. This brief contemplation sets an intention for the meal that naturally counteracts habitual patterns of distraction or rumination. When actually eating, monastery residents are instructed to maintain complete awareness of the sensory experience, noticing colours, textures, aromas, flavours, and the physical sensations of chewing and swallowing. Each bite is taken with full attention, with no talking or other distractions permitted during formal meals. This single-pointed focus naturally interrupts the mind's tendency to wander into planning, worrying, or rehashing past events, all forms of overthinking that typically consume our awareness during meals. The powerful effect of mindful eating on overthinking stems from its direct engagement with sensory experience. When we're fully present with the taste, texture, and aroma of our food, the mind naturally settles into direct perception rather than conceptual thinking. This shift from thinking about experience to directly experiencing creates a natural break in patterns of mental proliferation, offering a direct taste of presence that can extend beyond the meal itself. What makes this practice particularly valuable for contemporary life is its practicality. While we might not adopt the full formality of monastic meal rituals, bringing even a portion of this mindful attention to daily eating offers an accessible entry point to presence practice. Given that most people eat at least 3 times daily, transforming even one meal into a mindfulness practice creates regular opportunities to interrupt overthinking patterns throughout the day. Modern research confirms the benefits of this ancient practice. Studies show that mindful eating not only reduces overthinking during meals, but also improves digestion, increases meal satisfaction, and helps establish healthier relationships with food. The practice has proven particularly effective for addressing eating disorders and unhealthy eating patterns, which often involve being caught in mental narratives about food, body, and self-worth rather than present with the direct experience of eating. Organizations increasingly incorporate mindful eating principles into workplace wellness programs, recognizing that lunch breaks spent in mindless consumption while continuing to work actually diminish rather than restore mental energy. Some companies now designate mindful eating spaces, where employees can eat without devices or work materials, creating environmental support for present moment awareness during meals. Others offer brief guided mindful eating practices at the beginning of lunch periods, helping employees transition from work mode to present moment awareness. For those interested in developing personal mindful eating practices, Zen suggests starting simply rather than attempting to transform all eating habits at once. Many practitioners begin by designating just the first 3 bites of each meal for complete attention, gradually extending this awareness as capacity develops. Others choose to make 1 meal per day or week a completely mindful experience, eating in silence and without distractions for that designated time. The practice involves recognizing when the mind has wandered from direct experience into thinking about the food, judging it, comparing it to other meals, planning future activities, or any other form of mental commentary. When this wandering is noticed, practitioners gently return attention to the direct sensory experience of eating, the taste currently in the mouth, the texture being experienced, the physical sensation of holding utensils or bringing food to the mouth. What distinguishes mindful eating from simply focusing on food is the quality of non-judgmental awareness brought to the experience. Many people pay attention to food, but through a filter of evaluation. Is this healthy enough? Does this taste good enough? Should I be eating this? Mindful eating involves noticing such judgments when they arise, but not being defined by them, continually returning to the direct sensory experience beneath the conceptual overlay. The essence of Zen meal practice reminds us that nourishment happens only in the present moment. When we're lost in thought while eating, a common form of overthinking, we miss the actual experience of the meal. By bringing full awareness to this basic human activity, we not only derive greater satisfaction and nourishment from our food, but also cultivate the capacity for presence that can extend to other aspects of life. In this way, the simple act of eating becomes both nourishment for the body and training for the mind, simultaneously addressing physical hunger and the mental hunger that drives overthinking. While mindful eating practices work with everyday activities to address overthinking, Zen tradition also offers powerful narratives that illustrate fundamental principles of mental mastery. One such story involves the encounter between a Zen master and a samurai warrior, presenting a compelling lesson about conquering the hyperactive mind not through force, but through understanding its essential nature. As the story goes, a renowned samurai warrior approached a Zen master, deeply troubled by his inability to control his thoughts. Despite his exceptional physical discipline and battlefield prowess, his mind remained his most formidable opponent, constantly churning with worries, plans, and regrets that disturbed his peace and hindered his concentration during crucial moments. "Master," the warrior began after formally introducing himself, "I have conquered many enemies and mastered the way of the sword, yet I cannot conquer my own mind. It races uncontrollably, disturbing my focus and inner peace. Please teach me how to defeat this enemy within." The Zen master looked at the samurai thoughtfully and replied, "Show me this mind you wish to subdue." Confused by the request, the warrior said, "I cannot show it to you physically. It is my thoughts, my constant mental chatter that gives me no rest." "If you cannot show me this mind," responded the master, "then how can you hope to control what you cannot even locate? Bring me this mind, and I will help you pacify it." The samurai closed his eyes and attempted to grasp his thinking mind to present it to the master, but found himself in a predicament. When he tried to locate the thinking mind as an object, he could find nothing substantial, only a succession of thoughts arising and passing. The harder he tried to grasp his mind, the more it eluded him. After several minutes of frustrated effort, the samurai opened his eyes. "Master, I cannot find the mind to show you." The Zen master smiled. "There, I have already pacified it for you." This simple yet profound exchange illustrates a fundamental insight about overthinking that contradicts conventional approaches. Most efforts to control the overactive mind involve struggle, attempting to suppress thoughts, arguing with them, or forcing them into more positive patterns. This approach treats thoughts as enemies to be conquered, creating an internal battlefield that often intensifies rather than resolves mental turmoil. The master's approach reveals a completely different understanding. By asking the warrior to produce the mind he wished to control, he exposed a crucial insight. When we look directly for the thinking mind as an entity separate from thoughts themselves, we find nothing substantial. There is no solid mind apart from the momentary thoughts that arise and pass. Just as a river is nothing apart from flowing water, the mind we try to control is nothing apart from the flow of changing mental events. This realization shifts the entire framework for addressing overthinking. Instead of struggling against thoughts as if they were solid enemies, we recognize them as temporary appearances in awareness, like reflections in water or clouds in the sky. This recognition doesn't eliminate thoughts, but transforms our relationship with them. The very notion of conquering the mind is revealed as fundamentally misguided, based on a misunderstanding of what mind actually is. For the samurai, this encounter initiated a profound shift in his approach to mental discipline. Rather than treating his thoughts as enemies to be defeated through force of will, he began to recognize their insubstantial nature. He learned to rest in the awareness that perceives thoughts, rather than becoming entangled in their content. This approach didn't eliminate thinking, but allowed him to hold thoughts more lightly, neither suppressing them nor being controlled by them. Modern psychology has increasingly recognized the wisdom of this ancient teaching. Approaches like acceptance and commitment, therapy, and mindfulness-based interventions explicitly incorporate the understanding that directly fighting against unwanted thoughts often backfires, intensifying rather than reducing their influence. These approaches instead foster a different relationship with thinking, observing thoughts as mental events rather than absolute truths requiring action or elimination. The warrior's predicament particularly resonates with high achievers in contemporary society. Many successful professionals who have mastered external challenges find themselves frustrated by their inability to master their own minds. They bring the same forceful approach that worked in external conquest to the internal realm, only to discover that mental peace eludes such strategies. The Zen master's lesson offers a crucial perspective shift. The problem isn't lack of mental control, but the very paradigm of control itself. Neuroscience provides interesting parallels to this Zen teaching. Research indicates that attempting to suppress thoughts activates the very neural networks associated with those thoughts, often intensifying their presence, a phenomenon called ironic processing. By contrast, adopting an observing stance toward thoughts without attempting to control them activates different neural networks associated with present moment awareness and reduced rumination. For contemporary practitioners dealing with overthinking, this story offers practical guidance. Rather than struggling harder to control thoughts, we might ask, what is aware of these thoughts? This question directs attention to the observing awareness in which thoughts appear rather than to the thoughts themselves. Many discover that this shift of attention naturally creates a sense of spaciousness around thinking, without requiring force or control. Organizations working with high-performance teams have adapted this wisdom for workplace settings. Some now train leaders to recognize signs of collective overthinking, endless analysis, decision paralysis, or circular discussions, and respond not by pushing harder for solutions, but by creating space for broader awareness. This might involve stepping back from content-focused discussion to notice the thinking process itself, often revealing assumptions or patterns that were invisible when attention was fixed solely on content. The story's enduring relevance stems from its radical challenge to our usual approach to mental difficulties. It suggests that peace doesn't come from having the right thoughts or eliminating the wrong ones, but from recognizing the nature of thinking itself. Just as the samurai discovered he couldn't find a solid mind to control, we discover through practice that what we call overthinking has no substantial existence apart from momentary thoughts arising in awareness. This insight doesn't lead to passive resignation about mental habits, but to a more skillful engagement based on clear seeing rather than struggle, like a warrior who learns to move with an opponent's energy rather than directly opposing it. We learn to work with the nature of mind rather than against it. The freedom from overthinking that eluded the samurai through years of forceful discipline became accessible through a single moment of clear recognition that the mind he'd been fighting was not the solid entity he'd imagined, but a fluid, changing process with which he could establish a different relationship. The story of the Zen master and the samurai reveals a fundamental shift in relationship to thoughts, rather than trying to control them directly. This principle of unified awareness extends beyond formal meditation into various Zen arts that cultivate presence through physical activity. One of the most powerful of these practices is Zen calligraphy, or Shodo, which offers a tangible way to experience the integration of mind and body while naturally interrupting patterns of overthinking. Zen calligraphy differs significantly from ordinary handwriting or even Western calligraphic traditions. Rather than focusing primarily on creating beautiful characters, Shodo emphasizes the state of mind during the creative act itself. The final brushstroke reveals not just artistic skill, but the calligrapher's internal condition at the moment of creation. Any hesitation, fragmentation, or overthinking becomes immediately visible in the quality of the line. Before even touching brush to paper, practitioners of Shodo engage in careful preparation. They grind an ink stick against an inkstone with water, a repetitive circular motion that begins to quiet the discursive mind. The arrangement of materials, brush, paper, inkstone, water, follows traditional placement that has remained largely unchanged for centuries. This ritualized preparation creates a transition from ordinary activities and signals to the mind that something requiring complete presence is about to occur. The physical posture for calligraphy embodies the same principles found in Zazen: an upright spine, relaxed shoulders, and a stable base. The brush is typically held vertically rather than at an angle, requiring whole arm movement rather than just wrist and finger action. This whole body engagement helps prevent the disconnection between thinking mind and physical action that characterizes overthinking. When the entire body participates in creating a single stroke, there's simply no room for the mind to wander elsewhere. What makes Shodo particularly effective against overthinking is the requirement for uninterrupted action. Unlike other art forms where one can pause, correct, or revise, traditional Zen calligraphy demands that each character be completed in a single continuous movement without lifting the brush or making corrections. This requirement makes hesitation or second-guessing immediately apparent. Any moment of overthinking disrupts the flow and appears as weakness or inconsistency in the line. Mastery in Shodo isn't measured by technical perfection alone, but by what Japanese tradition calls kien, the energy or spirit flowing through the work. A technically perfect character lacking this quality of presence is considered inferior to one with minor imperfections but full vitality. This prioritization of presence over perfection directly counteracts the perfectionism that often drives overthinking patterns, offering practitioners a different value system that honors authenticity and wholeness over flawless execution. The phrase Shinshinichinyo, mind-body oneness, captures the state that Shodo cultivates. When fully engaged in drawing a character, the separation between thinker and action temporarily dissolves. There isn't a separate self directing the action. There is simply the action itself unfolding with its own intelligence. This state of unified awareness naturally interrupts the subject-object division that underlies most overthinking, where a separate me is constantly evaluating, judging, and second-guessing experience. For beginners, the first challenge in Shodo practice is typically overcoming the tendency to mentally rehearse strokes before executing them. This planning mind creates a gap between intention and action that manifests as hesitation in the brushstroke. Teachers often instruct new students to be the character rather than draw it, to embody its energy completely rather than representing it from a distance. This instruction points to direct participation rather than the mental removal that characterizes overthinking. The calligraphy tradition distinguishes between Isshin, formal, careful style, and Gyo, semi-cursive, or So, cursive styles. While beginners typically start with formal style to learn proper structure, the more flowing styles particularly challenge overthinking by requiring speed and spontaneity that leave no room for hesitation. Many practitioners find that moving to these more fluid styles creates breakthrough experiences where thinking steps aside and direct expression emerges. Contemporary brain research provides interesting perspectives on why calligraphy practice affects thinking patterns. Studies indicate that the combination of focused attention, precise physical movement, and aesthetic engagement activates multiple brain regions simultaneously, creating what neuroscientists call widespread coherence. This integrated brain activity can temporarily reorganize neural patterns that support overthinking, creating new pathways for more unified cognitive function. The lessons of Shodo extend well beyond the practice itself. Many practitioners discover that the quality of attention, developed through calligraphy, gradually influences other activities. the ability to engage completely in single actions without mental division becomes available in cooking, cleaning, professional tasks, and conversations. This transfer of training makes calligraphy particularly valuable as a laboratory for developing qualities of presence that can counteract overthinking throughout daily life. For modern practitioners without access to traditional training, simplified approaches to mindful calligraphy remain accessible. Even using an ordinary pen to draw simple shapes or letters with full attention can cultivate many of the same qualities. The key elements are slowing down enough to bring full awareness to the process, engaging the whole body rather than just the fingers, and committing fully to each stroke without hesitation or correction. Some find that setting aside even 5 minutes daily for this practice creates a valuable interruption to habitual overthinking patterns. Organizations have begun incorporating elements of mindful calligraphy into professional development programs, particularly for leadership training. The practice tangibly demonstrates how internal states affect external outcomes and how presence directly influences performance quality. Some companies use simplified calligraphy exercises before important meetings or creative sessions specifically to counteract the analytical overthinking that can hinder innovation and authentic communication. The wisdom of Shodo reminds us that overthinking often stems from disconnection between mind and body, between intention and action, between self and expression. By reunifying these artificially separated aspects of experience through the simple act of drawing a line, we rediscover the natural intelligence that flows when thinking assumes its proper place within the larger field of awareness. This reunification doesn't require eliminating thought, but integrating it within the wholeness of embodied experience where it can serve rather than dominate our actions and perceptions. While Zen calligraphy uses focused activity to interrupt overthinking, another powerful Zen practice works through auditory awareness, the mindful attention to temple bells. In traditional Zen monasteries, large bronze bells, bonsho, serve as central timekeeping instruments, but more importantly, they function as bells of mindfulness that call practitioners back to present moment awareness throughout the day. These temple bells possess distinctive acoustic properties, deep resonant tones that gradually fade rather than stopping abruptly. The rich harmonic overtones create sound that seems to fill space completely, making it particularly effective for capturing attention. When struck with a wooden mallet, a well-crafted bell produces vibrations that can be felt physically as well as heard, creating a multi-sensory experience that naturally draws awareness away from abstract thought. What makes the monastery bell particularly effective against overthinking is the traditional practice associated with it. When the bell sounds, monks are instructed to stop whatever they're doing, even mid-action, and bring complete attention to listening until the sound completely disappears. This creates what modern psychology might call a pattern interrupt, abruptly, halting the momentum of thinking and activity to establish fresh awareness in the present moment. This practice of stopping and listening completely might last only 30 seconds to a minute, as the sound gradually fades, but its effect can be profound. By temporarily suspending both physical activity and mental commentary, practitioners experience a brief but complete reset of awareness. The gaps between thoughts naturally widen during this deliberate listening, creating spaces of clarity that contrast with the usual density of overthinking. Zen teachers emphasize the quality of listening required, not analyzing the sound or thinking about bells, but directly experiencing the sensory reality of the sound waves as they move through space and interact with the body. This direct sensory engagement naturally draws attention away from conceptual thinking and into immediate experience. The gradual fading of the bell tone teaches practitioners to notice increasingly subtle sensations, developing a refinement of awareness that can detect the early stages of overthinking before they gain momentum. The monastic schedule traditionally includes specific bell-ringing times, dawn, meal times, meditation periods, evening, but also incorporates unexpected sounding specifically designed to catch the mind when it has wandered into habitual patterns. This element of unpredictability helps prevent the bell practice itself from becoming routinized or automatic. Even long-time practitioners can be startled into fresh awareness by an unexpected bell, instantly revealing how their minds had been wandering in thought rather than resting in presence. What makes this practice particularly valuable is how it trains the capacity to transition quickly between states of consciousness. Many people find that even when they can access mindful awareness during formal meditation, they quickly lose it when engaging in activity. The Bell practice specifically addresses this challenge by creating dozens of daily opportunities to shift from doing to being, gradually strengthening the mental muscles needed to make this transition quickly and completely. Modern neuroscience offers interesting perspectives on why this practice proves so effective. Research shows that auditory processing involves wide-ranging brain networks, and mindful listening activates regions associated with present moment awareness, while temporarily quieting the default mode network responsible for mind-wandering and self-referential thinking. The physical vibrations of sound also affect the body directly, potentially shifting nervous system states that support or inhibit overthinking. For contemporary practitioners, traditional temple bells have inspired numerous adaptations. Mindfulness apps and timers often incorporate bell sounds specifically designed to serve this function of calling wandering minds back to presence. Some people place small bells in their homes or workplaces, using them as intentional reminders to pause and reset awareness throughout the day. Others set recurring digital chimes on phones or computers to serve this same function amid modern environments. Organizations increasingly recognize the value of these mindful pauses. Some workplace wellness programs now incorporate brief bell practices between activities or at designated times during the workday. Meeting facilitators might begin or end sessions with a bell and a moment of complete listening, finding that this simple practice helps participants transition more fully into engagement or carry presence into subsequent activities more effectively. The practice can be personalized in countless ways. Some practitioners designate certain environmental sounds, church bells, clock chimes, bird song, even sirens, as bells of mindfulness that trigger the same practice of stopping and listening completely. Others create personal rituals using small bells or chimes at key transition points in their day, upon waking, before meals, when arriving home, or before sleep, to interrupt the momentum of habitual thinking and establish fresh awareness. What distinguishes this practice from simply taking breaks is the quality of attention involved. Rather than switching from one form of doing to another, the bell practice involves temporarily suspending all doing to rest in pure awareness. This complete reset, even when brief, can effectively clear accumulated mental clutter and prevent overthinking from gaining the momentum that makes it feel solid and inevitable. The wisdom of the monastery bell reminds us that liberation from overthinking doesn't require eliminating thoughts, but rather developing the capacity to step out of their stream at will. Each time we respond to the bell by establishing fresh awareness, we strengthen this capacity for mental freedom. The bells serve as external supports for this freedom, until eventually practitioners develop an internal bell, an awareness that can recognize when thinking has become excessive and naturally return to open presence without requiring external reminders. In essence, both Zen calligraphy and bell practices offer complementary approaches to the same fundamental challenge, maintaining unified awareness amid the mind's tendency toward fragmentation and abstract thinking. Whether through the focused activity of drawing a line or the receptive stillness of listening to a bell, these practices train the capacity to be completely present, a presence that naturally dissolves overthinking, not by fighting against thoughts, but by fully inhabiting the dimension of experience in which thinking is just one aspect of a much larger awareness. The mindful awareness cultivated through practices like Zen calligraphy and bell listening reveals something fundamental about our experience, that the quality of our attention dramatically affects our relationship with thinking. These practices naturally lead to a deeper question: what is the root cause of overthinking itself? Buddhist teachings offer a radical perspective on this question by examining the true nature of self and its relationship to excessive thinking. At the heart of Buddhist psychology lies a revolutionary insight. What we experience as overthinking is directly connected to our sense of having a permanent separate self that needs constant protection and enhancement. This insight isn't merely philosophical, but practical. It points to the fundamental cause of mental suffering and offers a pathway toward genuine freedom from overthinking. The Buddha described this insight through the teaching of anatta, or non-self, the understanding that what we typically experience as me or myself isn't a fixed, autonomous entity, but a dynamic process of constantly changing physical and mental phenomena. Rather than having a separate thinker who produces thoughts, Buddhist psychology suggests that thinking itself is simply one of many processes that collectively create the temporary impression of a separate self. This perspective directly challenges our usual experience. Most of us instinctively feel that we are the thinker of our thoughts, that there's a solid me behind the thinking process who controls and produces thoughts. When we look closely at our actual experience through meditation, however, we discover something surprising. Thoughts simply arise on their own due to countless causes and conditions. There's thinking happening, but no solid thinker can be found apart from the thinking itself. This distinction might seem abstract, but its implications for addressing overthinking are profound. When we believe we are a separate self that thinks, we naturally identify with our thoughts, taking them personally as my thoughts that define and represent me. This identification creates a circular situation where thinking becomes self-reinforcing. Each thought seems to confirm the existence of the thinker, creating a powerful feedback loop that intensifies overthinking. Consider what happens during a period of worry about a future event. From the conventional perspective, I am thinking worrying thoughts about something that might happen to me later. This framework naturally intensifies the worry, because it directly connects to my sense of identity and security. From the Buddhist perspective, there are simply worry thoughts arising due to conditioning, with no separate self either producing them or threatened by the imagined scenarios they depict. This shift in perspective doesn't eliminate thinking, but fundamentally changes its emotional impact and momentum. Modern psychology has begun to recognize the wisdom in this ancient perspective. Research on the default mode network, DMN, brain regions active during self-referential thinking, shows that this network becomes hyperactive in conditions characterized by overthinking like depression and anxiety. Practices that temporarily quiet self-referential processing like meditation reduce DMN activity and consequently reduce rumination and worry. This neural evidence supports the Buddhist insight that overthinking is intimately connected with our sense of separate selfhood. The Buddha offered a practical method for investigating the nature of self through the teaching of the 5 aggregates or skandhas. He suggested that what we call self is actually a collection of 5 processes: physical form, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, including thoughts, and consciousness. By systematically examining these components of experience, practitioners discover that none of them, individually or collectively, constitutes a permanent, independent self. Thoughts, in particular, are recognized as transient mental events rather than reflections of a solid identity. This investigation isn't abstract analysis, but direct experiential inquiry. When caught in overthinking, practitioners are invited to ask, who or what is thinking these thoughts? Or to whom do these thoughts appear? Rather than answering conceptually, they look directly at experience itself, often discovering that while thoughts are clearly present, no separate thinker can be found. This direct recognition can create an immediate shift in perspective that naturally loosens the grip of overthinking without requiring force or control. Contemporary mindfulness-based therapies have incorporated elements of this understanding in their approach to overthinking. Acceptance and commitment. Therapy, ACT, for example, uses the process of cognitive diffusion to help clients recognize that they are not their thoughts, but the awareness in which thoughts appear. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy similarly helps participants recognize thoughts as events in the mind, rather than direct reflections of reality or self. These approaches don't deny that thinking happens, but question our habitual identification with thoughts as personal possessions that define us. Organizations implementing mindfulness programs increasingly recognize the importance of addressing self-concept as part of working with overthinking in workplace settings. Leaders trained in mindfulness learn to recognize when team members are caught in self-referential thinking loops that hinder effective collaboration and decision-making. By creating cultures that value perspective-taking and cognitive flexibility, these organizations help members hold their thoughts and opinions more lightly, rather than as fixed extensions of identity. For individual practitioners, several approaches can help apply this insight to daily overthinking. One practice involves noticing the use of possessive pronouns in relation to thinking, catching phrases like "my thoughts" or my worry, and investigating whether thoughts actually belong to anyone or simply arise and pass according to conditions. Another approach involves deliberately shifting perspective from first person to third person when noticing, overthinking, observing there is anxiety happening rather than I am anxious, creating slight but significant distance from complete identification with the thinking process. Perhaps the most powerful practice involves directly recognizing the spacious awareness in which all thoughts appear. By shifting attention from the content of thoughts to the consciousness that knows them, practitioners discover a dimension of mind that remains unaffected by thinking, regardless of its intensity or content. This recognition doesn't eliminate thoughts, but reveals their true nature as temporary appearances within a much larger field of awareness, like clouds passing through the sky, rather than defining or limiting the sky itself. The Buddha compared this recognition to the sun breaking through clouds. When we glimpse our true nature beyond identification with thinking, the light of awareness naturally dispels the seeming solidity of overthinking. This isn't a conceptual understanding, but a direct recognition that can occur in any moment when we step out of complete absorption in the thinking process and recognize the awareness within which thinking occurs. The insight into non-self doesn't lead to confusion about conventional identity, but to freedom from limiting self-concepts that drive overthinking. We still use names, fulfill roles, and navigate social identities, but we hold these constructs more lightly, recognizing them as functional designations rather than defining realities. This lightened relationship with identity naturally reduces the compulsive thinking that serves to constantly reinforce and protect a sense of separate selfhood. While the Buddhist insight into non-self addresses the root cause of overthinking, Zen tradition also emphasizes the importance of bringing mindfulness into everyday activities. Moving from understanding to practical application, Zen teachings show how ordinary tasks, cooking, cleaning, gardening, even administrative work, can be transformed into powerful mindfulness practices that naturally interrupt overthinking patterns. In traditional Zen monasteries, ordinary work isn't separate from spiritual practice but an essential aspect of it. The Japanese term samu refers to work practice, physical labor performed with the same quality of attention brought to formal meditation. Whether sweeping the meditation hall, preparing vegetables in the kitchen, or weeding the garden, each task is approached as an opportunity for complete presence rather than a chore to be completed while the mind wanders elsewhere. What distinguishes mindful work from ordinary activity is the quality of attention brought to the process. In conventional work, we often operate on autopilot, physically performing tasks while mentally rehearsing conversations, planning future activities, or rehashing past events. This divided attention not only reduces work quality, but creates fertile ground for overthinking to flourish unchecked. In mindful, work practice, body and mind are unified in the present activity, leaving no room for the proliferation of unnecessary thinking. The approach to tasks in Zen practice involves several key elements. First is whole body awareness, feeling the physical sensations of movement, posture, and contact with objects rather than working mechanically. Second is single tasking, doing one thing completely rather than multitasking or rushing ahead mentally to the next activity. Third is process orientation, focusing on the doing itself rather than hurrying toward completion or results. Together, these elements create conditions where overthinking naturally subsides not through suppression, but through complete engagement with present activity. Thich Nhat Hanh, the renowned Zen teacher, popularized the phrase, washing the dishes to wash the dishes, to capture this approach. He observed that most people wash dishes in order to finish washing them, their attention already on future activities while their hands mechanically complete the current task. This divided attention creates internal fragmentation that fuels overthinking. By contrast, washing dishes with complete attention, feeling the water temperature, noticing the soap bubbles, experiencing the movement of hands, unifies body and mind in the present moment, naturally interrupting thought proliferation. Modern research confirms the psychological benefits of this approach. Studies on flow states show that complete absorption in appropriately challenging activities creates conditions where self-referential thinking temporarily subsides, leading to experiences of heightened performance and well-being. The Zen approach to everyday tasks essentially creates mini-flow experiences throughout the day, reducing the mental space available for rumination and worry. What makes this approach particularly valuable for addressing overthinking is its accessibility. While formal meditation might require setting aside dedicated time, mindful engagement with necessary tasks integrates practice directly into daily life. Washing dishes, folding laundry, preparing meals, commuting, and countless other routine activities become opportunities for presence, rather than fertile ground for mind-wandering and overthinking. Organizations increasingly recognize the value of this approach in workplace settings. Some companies now incorporate mindful transitions between tasks or meetings, brief periods where employees consciously complete one activity before beginning the next, rather than mentally jumping ahead while physically finishing previous work. Others designate specific workplace tasks as mindfulness anchors, perhaps filing documents, organizing materials, or even routine data entry, approaching these activities with special attention as opportunities to reset awareness during the workday. For individual practitioners, the process of transforming ordinary tasks into mindfulness practice typically begins with selecting specific activities as deliberate practice opportunities. Many people choose routine morning activities like making coffee, showering, or getting dressed as initial practice periods, gradually extending mindful awareness to more complex or challenging tasks. The key is not trying to maintain perfect attention throughout the entire activity at first, but repeatedly recognizing when the mind has wandered and gently returning attention to physical sensations and direct experience. Certain tasks prove particularly effective as mindfulness anchors due to their sensory richness. Food preparation, for instance, engages multiple senses simultaneously. The visual appearance of ingredients, textures when cutting or mixing, aromas during cooking, and eventually taste. This multisensory engagement naturally draws attention to direct experience, making cooking an especially powerful practice for interrupting abstract overthinking and returning to concrete present moment awareness. The mindful approach to daily tasks doesn't require adopting any particular belief system or philosophy. The practice is fundamentally pragmatic. When attention fully occupies the present activity, the mental space available for overthinking naturally diminishes. This isn't about forcing the mind into a particular state, but simply engaging so completely with what we're already doing that unnecessary thinking finds no foothold in our experience. Perhaps the most profound teaching of Zen work practice is that enlightenment isn't found separate from ordinary activities, but within them when approached with appropriate attention. As the old Zen saying goes, before enlightenment chop wood and carry water, after enlightenment chop wood and carry water. The activities don't change, but the quality of presence brought to them transforms completely. This perspective liberates us from seeking special experiences or achievements beyond the present moment, revealing that freedom from overthinking is available precisely where we already are, in the simple, direct experience of this moment's activity when engaged with wholehearted attention. The Zen approach to everyday tasks shows how ordinary activities can become powerful mindfulness practices when we engage with them completely. This integration of practice with daily life reveals an often overlooked aspect of Buddhist teaching: the importance of joy and lightheartedness in addressing overthinking. While meditation is frequently associated with seriousness and discipline, the tradition also emphasizes that genuine joy serves as a powerful antidote to rumination and mental proliferation, embodied most visibly in the iconic figure of the Laughing Buddha. The figure commonly known as the Laughing Buddha or Happy Buddha, Hotei in Japanese tradition, represents an important counterbalance to the sometimes austere image of Buddhist practice. Typically depicted with a large round belly, carrying a cloth sack, and wearing a broad smile, or hearty laugh, this figure embodies contentment, generosity, and lightheartedness. While often mistaken for Gautama Buddha, the historical Buddha, Hotei actually represents a semi-historical Chinese monk from the 10th century who became revered for his joyful spirit and compassionate nature. What makes the Laughing Buddha particularly relevant to addressing overthinking is how dramatically he contrasts with the serious, analytical mindset that typically drives rumination. His physical representation immediately communicates a different relationship with life, one of acceptance, ease, and good humor, rather than striving, analyzing, and problem-solving. The prominent belly suggests abundance and contentment with what is, while the ever-present smile reflects a mind that doesn't take itself too seriously, even amid life's challenges. Throughout Zen literature, We find numerous stories of masters using humour, laughter, and seemingly absurd actions to break through students' conceptual thinking patterns. In one famous account, a monk asked the serious question, "What is the Buddha?" To which the master Yunmen simply replied, "A dried piece of dung." This unexpected humorous response was designed not to be funny for its own sake, but to short-circuit the student's analytical approach to spiritual questions. The resulting mental interruption could create an opening for direct insight beyond conceptual thinking. These humorous interventions work because laughter creates an immediate physiological and psychological state change. When we laugh genuinely, even briefly, several significant shifts occur in our body-mind system. Physically, laughter releases tension in the body, increases oxygen intake, and triggers the release of endorphins, the body's natural feel-good chemicals. Mentally, it creates a momentary suspension of our usual thought patterns, interrupting even deeply entrenched rumination cycles. This natural pattern interrupt can provide a brief but crucial gap in otherwise continuous overthinking. Neuroscience research supports this understanding, showing that positive emotional states broaden attention and cognitive flexibility while reducing activity in brain regions associated with rumination. A genuine smile or laugh shifts our nervous system state from stress response to what psychologists call rest and digest mode, creating physiological conditions where overthinking has difficulty maintaining its grip. This isn't just about positive thinking, but about actual neurobiological state changes that affect thinking patterns at a fundamental level. What distinguishes the Buddhist approach to joy from superficial happiness seeking is its groundedness in reality rather than escapism. The laughing Buddha doesn't represent denial of life's difficulties, but a fundamentally different relationship with them, one that includes them within a larger perspective where humour and lightness remain possible. This inclusive awareness allows us to acknowledge challenges without becoming completely identified with them, creating crucial breathing room around difficult experiences. Zen practice includes specific approaches to cultivating this quality of joyful awareness. One traditional method involves intentionally noticing and appreciating small pleasures throughout the day. The warmth of sunlight, the taste of tea, the sound of rainfall, with full attention rather than taking these experiences for granted. This deliberate savouring naturally counteracts the negativity bias that fuels much overthinking, where the mind fixates on problems and potential threats while overlooking countless positive aspects of experience. Another approach involves cultivating what might be called self-compassionate humour, the ability to gently laugh at our own tendencies toward complication and overthinking. This isn't harsh self-mockery, but a kind recognition of the universal human tendency to create problems through thinking that aren't actually present in direct experience. When we can smile gently at our mind's elaborate constructions rather than being completely caught in them, we access a dimension of awareness that remains free even amid overthinking. Organizations implementing mindfulness programs increasingly recognize the importance of joy and humor in workplace well-being. Some companies now include joy practices alongside more traditional mindfulness training, encouraging employees to intentionally notice and appreciate positive aspects of their work experience. Others create physical environments that support lightheartedness, whether through artwork, comfortable gathering spaces, or even playful elements that remind people not to take corporate seriousness too absolutely. For individual practitioners working with overthinking tendencies, several approaches can help integrate this joyful perspective into daily life. One method involves intentionally scheduling brief joy breaks throughout the day, short periods specifically dedicated to experiencing something pleasurable with full attention, whether enjoying a favourite beverage, stepping outside for fresh air, or engaging in brief movement that feels good. These intentional pleasant experiences create natural interruptions to rumination cycles. Another powerful practice involves noticing when we've become overly serious or intense about a situation and deliberately bringing a lighter perspective. This might include asking, "Will this matter in 5 years?" or "Am I making this more complicated than it needs to be?" Such questions can create small shifts in perspective that loosen overthinking's grip without denying legitimate concerns. The key is developing the flexibility to shift between appropriate seriousness and light-hearted perspective, rather than being locked into either extreme. Perhaps the most profound teaching embodied by the laughing Buddha is that spiritual freedom doesn't always come through striving and seriousness, but often through letting go into natural joy and ease. This understanding directly challenges the perfectionism and self-improvement obsession that drives much overthinking, suggesting that the freedom we seek might be closer and more accessible than our complicated thinking patterns would have us believe. Sometimes a genuine laugh reveals more truth than hours of serious analysis. The joyful perspective represented by the laughing Buddha points toward a fundamental insight that lies at the heart of Zen tradition, the understanding of non-duality. This teaching directly addresses the root cause of overthinking by challenging the basic assumption that underlies most mental suffering, the perceived separation between the thinker and their thoughts, between subject and object, between self and world. This insight into non-duality represents the culmination of Zen practice and offers the most radical solution to overthinking. The concept of non-duality, Advaya in Sanskrit, points to the recognition that the divisions we perceive between ourselves and our experience are mental constructions rather than fundamental reality. Our ordinary consciousness operates through constant division. I, the subject, am having thoughts, the objects, that I must somehow manage or control. This dualistic framework creates the very conditions where overthinking flourishes, as the apparent separate self attempts to control the thinking process through more thinking, creating an endless loop of mental activity. Zen masters like Dogen have pointed to this understanding through teachings that initially seem paradoxical. Rather than viewing thoughts as problems to be eliminated, Dogen suggested that thoughts are themselves enlightenment when seen in their true nature. This doesn't mean that all thinking is somehow spiritually advanced, but rather that the fundamental nature of thoughts, their emptiness, transparency, and lack of separate existence from awareness itself, is identical to the nature of enlightened mind when recognized directly. This non-dual perspective dramatically shifts how we relate to overthinking. Instead of seeing thoughts as enemies to be conquered or problems to be solved by a separate self, we recognize that both thoughts and the apparent thinker are appearances within the same field of awareness, like waves appearing on the ocean while never being separate from it. Just as waves aren't problems for the ocean, but simply its natural expression under certain conditions, thoughts aren't fundamentally problematic for awareness, but simply its momentary expression under certain conditions. The Zen practice of shikantaza, or just sitting, directly cultivates this non-dual recognition. Unlike meditation approaches that involve focusing on specific objects or manipulating experience in particular ways, shikantaza involves simply sitting with open awareness that neither grasps at nor rejects any content of experience. This radical inclusiveness allows practitioners to directly recognize the non-dual nature of awareness and its contents, including thoughts. Nothing needs to be eliminated or achieved because the freedom being sought is already present as the fundamental nature of awareness itself. What makes this approach particularly transformative for addressing overthinking is how it shifts the entire framework of the problem. From the conventional perspective, overthinking appears as a personal problem that a separate self must solve through better mental management strategies. From the non-dual perspective, the very sense of being a separate self struggling with my thoughts is itself just another appearance within boundless awareness. Recognizing this doesn't eliminate thoughts, but fundamentally transforms our relationship with them. Modern psychology has begun acknowledging the wisdom of this perspective through approaches like the observing self in acceptance and commitment therapy, or the witness consciousness in transpersonal psychology. These frameworks recognize that behind our identification with specific thoughts and feelings lies a dimension of awareness that can observe these changing experiences without being defined or limited by them. This observing capacity isn't a separate entity, but a fundamental property of consciousness itself, the knowing aspect that remains constant amid changing contents. For practitioners working with overthinking, several approaches can help access this non-dual recognition in practical ways. One method involves shifting attention from the content of thoughts to the awareness in which they appear. Rather than being completely absorbed in what thoughts say about reality, we notice the space of knowing in which thoughts arise and pass. This simple shift of attention from content to context can create an immediate sense of spaciousness around thinking without requiring any manipulation of the thoughts themselves. Another approach involves questioning the apparent boundary between inside and outside experience. When caught in overthinking, we typically experience thoughts as happening in here, while the world exists out there. By deliberately attending to how external sounds, sensations, and sights are appearing in the same field of awareness as thoughts, we can begin to recognize the artificial nature of this division. The boundaries between thinking and perceiving, between self and world, begin to soften, revealing a more unified field of experience. Organizations working with mindfulness increasingly incorporate elements of non-dual understanding in leadership development. Some executive programs now include practices that help leaders recognize how their sense of separate selfhood drives defensive thinking patterns that hinder collaboration and innovation. By cultivating awareness of the constructed nature of boundaries between self and other, these programs help develop more inclusive perspectives that naturally reduce the overthinking that stems from self-protection and identity maintenance. What makes the non-dual approach particularly valuable is its directness. Rather than adding more techniques or strategies to an already overcrowded mental landscape, it points directly to the recognition that can liberate us from the whole framework of problem and solution that drives overthinking. This doesn't mean dismissing practical approaches, but recognizing their provisional nature while resting increasingly in the awareness that transcends yet includes all mental activity. The journey through various Zen practices, from mindful breathing to koan study, from tea ceremonies to workplace mindfulness, ultimately leads to this fundamental recognition. Overthinking isn't a problem located in a separate self that requires fixing, but a temporary activity appearing in boundless awareness that requires recognition. When this recognition occurs, even briefly, we experience what Zen calls our original face before our parents were born, the dimension of being that exists prior to thinking, yet expresses freely through it when not obscured by misidentification. This non-dual recognition doesn't eliminate the practical value of all the mindfulness techniques and practices we've explored. Rather, it reveals their deeper purpose, not to achieve a particular state or eliminate certain types of thinking, but to create conditions where our true nature can be recognized directly. Each practice, whether formal meditation or mindful daily activity, serves as a finger pointing toward the moon of non-dual awareness that has been present all along beneath the surface of our busy minds. The freedom from overthinking that Zen tradition points toward isn't found in having no thoughts or only having certain kinds of thoughts. It's found in recognizing the true nature of both thoughts and the awareness in which they appear. When this recognition becomes increasingly stable through practice, thinking assumes its proper place as one expression of our human capacity, rather than the primary definer of our identity and experience. We remain free to use the incredible tool of conceptual thinking, when useful, while resting in the spacious awareness that transcends yet includes all thinking, the ultimate antidote to the suffering created by overthinking.